theyeshiva.net.
The opening of Megillah Esther, the scroll of Esther, which all Jews read on the holiday of Purim, famously opens with the pasuk, with the verse, Vayihi b'mei Achashverosh. And the way the pasuk is phrased is, and I'll say it in the niggin, in the melody, in which we say the Megillah. Vayihi b'mei Achashverosh, hu Achashverosh hamelech me'duvat kush sheva v'esrim u'meya medina, which means it was in the days of Achashverosh. He is the Achashverosh who reigned from Hoidu till Kush, from India till Ethiopia, over 127 provinces. And the Megillah continues to tell the story how he was sitting on his throne in the capital of the Persian Empire, which was Shushan. And in the third year, after 3 years of kingship, he decided to make and throw a grand feast for all of his ministers, all of his servants, his entire army, and all of the governors in all of his provinces, displaying his wealth and his kingdom. Rashi, the great commentator of the Tanakh, quotes the words, hu Achashverosh. What perturbs Rashi is something very obvious. It should have said, Vayihi b'mei Achashverosh, hamoilech ma'hoidu vat kush sheva v'esrim u'meya medina. It was in the days of Achashverosh, who reigned from Hoidu, from India to Ethiopia, of 127 provinces. There seems to be two words in this verse that are superfluous, unnecessary. Vayihi b'mei Achashverosh, hu Achashverosh hamelech ma'hoidu vat kush. It was in the days of Achashverosh. He is the Achashverosh who reigned from Hoidu till Kush. The pasuk could have said, Vayihi b'mei Achashverosh hamelech ma'hoidu vat kush. This question is a very obvious question, and any serious student who reads it has to take pause. Why these two extra excessive words? The Even Ezra, Rabbeinu Avram Even Ezra, who lived in the 12th century in Spain, explains that the reason it says hu Achashverosh is because there was more than one Achashverosh in the Persian Empire. So to say Vayihi b'mei Achashverosh, there was more than one. In order to identify that we're talking about one and not to confuse it with the other, the pasuk says Vayihi b'mei Achashverosh hamoilech ma'hoidu vat kush. That wouldn't suffice it because there was more than one. So he says, which Achashverosh? Who Achashverosh? The Achashverosh I'm talking about is the one whose empire reached such grand space from Hoidu till Kush. That's what Even Ezra explains, which seems like a very straightforward and pleasant explanation. It would be like if you're talking about the history of American presidents. You'll say it was in the days of President Bush. But there was more than one President Bush. There was President Bush the father and President Bush the son. So you might say it was in the days of President Bush, the one who declared the first Gulf War against Saddam Hussein. So you'll know it's the days of President Bush, the father, the papa, not the son. So Vayihi b'mei Achashverosh, I don't have to say Allah Havdil here, Vayihi b'mei Achashverosh, the Even Ezra says, hu Achashverosh, which one? That Achashverosh, hamelech ma'hoidu vat kush. When you look, however, at Rashi gives a very different interpretation. Rashi says, Vayihi b'mei Achashverosh, hu Achashverosh. So on the words b'mei Achashverosh, Rashi says, this was a Persian king who reigned after Cyrus. He was a successor of Koresh, of Cyrus. He reigns at the end of 70 years of the Babylonian exile. The Jewish people were exiled into Babylonia in the year 586 BCE, before the Common Era, the year of the destruction of this first Beis HaMikdash, and 70 years later, they ultimately begin a return back to the Holy Land, some of them, and this Achashverosh reigns during that period. Then Rashi says, Hu Achashverosh, Hu Birishoy Mitchilosoi Va'at Soifa. The reason the Torah, the Tanakh, adds the words Hu Achashverosh is to teach Hu Achashverosh. He is Achashverosh. He remained in his wickedness from the beginning of the story till the end of the story. There's going to be a long story, Rashi says. Don't think that this man ever went through a change or a metamorphosis. He remains the same Rasha, the same obnoxious politician from the beginning of the story till the end of the story. That's why the Megilah says, Vayhi b'mei Achashverosh, not just HaMoilech Ma'odavat Kush. Hu Achashverosh. How is Rashi explaining the words? Vayhi b'mei Achashverosh, Hu Achashverosh. It would be like you say in Yiddish. It was in the days of Achashverosh, and you should know Achashverosh, Hu Achashverosh. Achashverosh is the Zelba Achashverosh. Achashverosh remains the same Achashverosh. There's going to be many Achashveroshes. You might think the man in the beginning of the story is not the man at the end of the story. He went through a change of heart. He went through a metamorphosis. His good Jewish wife got to him at some point and influenced him and changed him. So the Megilah says right in the opening, Vayhi b'mei Achashverosh, and I just want to tell you, Hu Achashverosh, he is the same Achashverosh from the beginning till the end. Which at first glance, this Rashi is extremely strange. Rashi, whose name was Rabbeinu Shlomo Yitzchaki, who lived in the 11th century, from 1040 till 1105 in France, in Troy, in the city of Troy in France, who was the greatest biblical commentator, explains numerous times in his commentary on Chumash, Ani lo basi ela lipshutei shel mikra. My job is to explain the literal interpretation of the verses. If there's no literal explanation available, Rashi will resort to midrashic explanations, homiletical explanations, symbolic explanations. But his mission statement in Chumash and in Tanakh, meaning in Torah, Nevi'im, and Ksuvim, is always pshutoi shel Ksuvim, as he puts it. Pshutoi shel Mikra, the pshat. The most literal, straightforward, simple reading, as we would say. Not to exclude the fact that there are other layers, but there are different genres in Jewish literature. Different mefarshim, different commentators focus on different layers of explanations. Rashi's focus is pshutei shel mikra. You have here two superfluous words. Hu Achashverosh. You look at the Even Ezra, he gives a very literal, straightforward interpretation. You might get confused between Persian kings. There was more than one Achashverosh, so the Megilah identifies him. Vayhi b'mei Achashverosh, there was more than one. Let me give you a siman, let me give you a sign, an identifying biography to know who I'm talking about. You might do it in years, you might do it through an event. So we describe his reign, and then we can know who Achashverosh we're talking about. That's a simple explanation. Comes Rashi, and instead of embracing what would seem as a very straightforward, simple interpretation, presents to us what would seem like a far-fetched, extremely midrashic and non-literal interpretation, that when it says Hu Achashverosh, we're not even talking about the physical person. We're talking about his character traits, and we're talking about something that you have to know at the end of the story. Vayhi b'mei Achashverosh, Hu Achashverosh. We don't mean he's Achashverosh. He's the same Achashverosh, don't think anything changed. Why would Rashi reject the literal interpretation to give the midrashic interpretation that these two extra words are actually a description of the psychological or moral profile of Achashverosh? There is a principle we say in the Chadoidi Shabbos, Soif Ma'aseh b'machshava tchila. The end of action, the final act, is always rooted in the first thought, which is also a very practical idea. When you're planning, say, to build a home, your first initial thought, that initial dream, is only implemented with the last pound of the hammer. When the contractor finishes his job, hopefully it doesn't take 20 years. That's when your original thought is actually facilitated. Soif Maisa, the last action, is always connected with Machshavat Chila, with the first thought. In Sefer Yetzirah it says, Na'utz Soifon betchilason utchilason besoifon. The beginning is etched in the end, and the end is etched in the beginning. To appreciate what Rashi was thinking, one has to go to the last verse of the Megillah. So from the first verse, we travel to the last verse, to the final culmination of the entire Megillah. The Megillah ends, the last chapter, chapter 10. Ki Mordechai HaYehudi Mishnah LaMelech Achashverosh. Mordechai the Jew was the viceroy. He was the prime minister, the second in command to the king Achashverosh. V'godel LaYehudim v'ratzui l'roiv echav doirish toiv la'amai v'doiver shalom l'chol zara. He was great among the Jewish people. He was beloved by most of his brothers. He sought the welfare of his nation, and he spoke peace to all of his children and descendants. Now, whenever you see a verse in the Tanakh tell you, Ratzui l'roiv echav, our ears perk up and say he was beloved by most of his brothers. Even if that's true, we don't expect a Jew to be embraced by all of his brothers. That wouldn't be very Jewish. But the Megillah makes a point to emphasize in the last verse that Mordechai is Ratzui l'roiv echav. Don't think he was beloved by all of his brothers, by most of his brothers. This, of course, needs explanation. What was the issue that some people had with Mordechai? How can anybody criticize Mordechai? I mean, he is the man who literally affected the salvation of the Jewish people. He is the one who kept on guiding Esther while she was in the palace before the decree. After the decree of Haman, he is the one who guided Esther on what to do and how to do it, even though Esther ultimately created her own plan. But Mordechai was the wind, so to speak, beneath the wings, who motivated her and inspired her and helped her overcome her initial reluctance and natural fear to enter into the chamber of Achasverosh, who was a real dictator and a tyrant. And if, as she told Mordechai, if you go in without permission, you can come out with a head shorter. So Mordechai and Esther together, the great team, created the salvation of the Jewish people. How can anybody say anything disparagingly about Mordechai? No, akashaf yidna, question. But this is what bothers Rashi. Ratzui l'roiv echav. Why roiv? Why not all? Why didn't everybody love Mordechai? So I quote Rashi. Melam v'loi l'chol echav. He was not beloved, not cherished. Ratzi actually doesn't mean beloved. Ratzi means agreed. Most of his brothers agreed to him. V'loi l'chol echav. Not all of his brothers agreed with him. Melamed shepirshu mimenu miktzah Sanhedrin. You learn from here that some of the Sanhedrin separated from Mordechai. They segregated from Mordechai. Mordechai was the leader of a group known as the Sanhedrin, which I guess loosely can be translated as the Jewish Supreme Court. The Sanhedrin, which is actually a Greek word, is the name that was given to the 71 members of the great Jewish Supreme Court that functioned from the days of Moshe Rabbeinu until the 5th century after the Common Era. And this was the most important body of authority among the Jewish people, who ultimately were the spiritual leaders of the Jewish nation. When there were disputes, when there were debates, they would make the final decisions. This was the body of leaders that were ordained person to person from their mentors all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu, who ordained 70 people, and he was the 71st. You had to have an odd number in order to take votes, because you had to follow the majority if there was a dispute. In each generation, there was the institution was devolved in the 5th century, in the 400s, when the Talmud Bavli was being sealed in Iraq. That's when this institution was dissolved. It was impossible to maintain it anymore, and to maintain it in not ideal circumstances could create the worst corruption in Jewish history, and it was much healthier to dissolve it and to create decentralized Judaism, if you wish, which is how we survive till this very day. But that's a separate topic. Because with the Sanhedrin, for it to be what it's supposed to be, has to be immune to corruption. And if you don't have those circumstances, then it's much worse to have a central body than to have a completely decentralized body. It's a fascinating topic, but it's for another time. But what I want to emphasize here is that in each generation there was the Nasi, the leader of the Sanhedrin, the man who, so to speak, stood in the shoes of Moshe. What were the qualifications to be in the Sanhedrin? Very, very intense qualifications. of course, tremendous knowledge, but equally important, and maybe even more important, was Yiras Shamayim, tremendous humility and fear of heaven, and complete commitment to integrity and truth. Mordechai was the leader of the Sanhedrin in his day. So Rashi says, some members of the Sanhedrin separated from him. They felt that he made a mistake. Why? Because he became close to government. He became the prime minister of Persia. He became the second in command. And therefore, his learning was compromised. You become the prime minister of a Persian empire. Achashverosh was a Moshel Bekipa. This was the most powerful empire at the time until it was defeated by the Greeks. The Persians defeated the Babylonians, and the Greeks defeated the Persians. And that's when history moved on to the Greek era. But Mordechai becomes the Mishnah Lamelech Achashverosh. So most of his brothers are very agreeable with him. But only most. Some of his brothers, Rashi says, and it's his brothers, meaning these are his friends, his colleagues, people on his level, his peers, Echav, his brothers. It's not just Stam people. Why? Because he becomes a Karev L'Malchus. He's so involved in the empire, in the government. He's so close. Naturally, some of his learning is compromised. Some of his learning is compromised, and therefore some of them are not agreeable with Mordechai, are not agreeing to Mordechai. This is a very interesting conclusion of the Megilah, and Rashi has to explain it because it says L'roiv Echav. You can't ignore that. You have to explain it. But here we have a question. What was Mordechai thinking? The decree was over. Haman was executed. His 10 sons were hung. The war that Haman planned against the Jews on the 13th of Adar, which was the day designated by Haman as the day of genocide, Rachmana litzlan, lahashmid lareg ula'abed kol haYehudim minar v'adzaken taven noshim, a day dedicated to the extermination, lo yaleinu, of the entire people, the entire Jewish nation, young and old, children, women, men, all, every single last Jew. That day has been transformed v'napechu to the day that the Jewish people, acting in self-defense, killed their oppressors and those who wanted to murder them. Granted. Thus, everything was changed. Haman was out of the picture. His children were out of the picture. And most importantly, the decree was completely obliterated. On the contrary, the honor and the glory of Mordechai and Esther of the Jewish people reached its pinnacle, reached its zenith, its crescendo in the Persian Empire. And all of those who were determined to kill the Jews, what they wanted to do to their foes was brought back right on them. This is what happens now. Comes Mordechai, and he continues to remain close in the government. He assumes the position of prime minister. So some of his brothers say, this is wrong, Mordechai. The question is, what exactly were they thinking? What exactly was he thinking? Certainly, they couldn't have issues with the fact that when the decree was happening, Mordechai got very involved. Pikuach nefesh is doiche kol haTorah kula. Saving even one life overrides all of Torah, and certainly being involved all day in learning Torah, despite its tremendous value. That's what Mordechai was doing. Nobody could disagree with him on that. This is even to save one life. Never mind to save literally every single Jewish life that existed at the time. And Achashverosh was a Moshel Bekipa. He basically ruled much of the civilized world that was known to us. Mehoidu vat kush. So this included probably every single Jew alive, or almost every single Jew alive. That they couldn't have issues with. What did they have issues with afterwards? Now you could go back to cruise control. The highway is not turbulent anymore. The sea calmed down. Everybody is safe. Everybody knows that the first lady is Jewish. Esther revealed her identity. Achashverosh is in seventh heaven. He loves his queen. He's happy with the Jews. Alles is good and fine. Haman is gone. He was killed. His children were killed. The Gzeira is gone. The killers were destroyed. The chal's good. So they're telling Mordechai, what do you still have to remain in government? Why are you going away from the world of Torah to the world of politics? And now the world of, and that's a good, and that's where their tightness. Nonetheless, most of the people disagree with them. This is a minority, it's not a majority. Ratzu l'roivechav. Most brothers of Mordechai felt he was doing the right thing. A minority felt he was doing the wrong thing. They felt he was doing the wrong thing is because if things are good now, why shouldn't you go back to your nest? Go back to the nest where you were conceived, where you developed, to your natural home, which is the world of learning, the world of Torah. What do you have to hang out in the corrupt palace of Achasverosh? We all know the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, chapter 3 in Ethics of the Fathers, Heve zehirin b'rishus. Always be careful with government. Why? They're nice to you when they need you, and when they don't need you, they'll backstab you. That's what the Pasuk says in the Mishnah says in Pirkei Avos. I think it was Henry Kissinger, the Jewish Secretary of State of the U.S., who once said, it's a pity, he says, that all the corrupt politicians make the other 10% look bad. I think it was Thomas Jefferson who once said, when a man casts his longing eyes on the offices of politics, corruptness, rottenness begins to emerge in his conduct. There was somebody else who once said, why is it that there are not so many female politicians? And the answer is, it's too hard to put makeup on two faces. Politics is not a clean world. Even somebody who goes in with good intentions, it's a very, very tough world. That's what Jefferson meant. The moment you get comfortable on the throne, other elements come into your heart. Rottenness, as he put it, rottenness comes into a person's heart. Sometimes they begin very idealistically, but at the end, it's a very difficult position to be able to maintain your idealism, your purity, your integrity, your emesdikkeit. It's hard. That's even when you're dealing with somebody who goes in an ideal fashion. The fact is that many people in politics are not very, very refined always in their moral stature. Nathan Sharansky, the famous Soviet refusenik who was 9 years in the Soviet Gulag in Siberia and ultimately made it out to Israel, and he went into the Knesset. He became a minister. So he once said, what's the difference between me and other Israeli politicians? He said, I went to prison before I went to the government. So that's what the Mishnah means when it says, Heve zehirin b'rishus. Be careful with government. This is their taina to Mordechai. Especially you, from all people. This is not your place. Your place is the Beis Medrash. Your place is Talmud. Your place is Sanhedrin. This was their taina. So Rashi now was thinking, this is a good question. Why did he leave Torah and remain in the palace? He should have said, Achasverosh, it was nice knowing you. I'm going to come once a year for the Purim party. I'm sure they made a Purim party by Achasverosh. I don't know what it looked like, but I'm sure they made a Purim party. I'll come once a year. He could send flowers Friday afternoon. Whatever he had to do, you got to do what you got to do. But he didn't have to remain as entrenched. Karav l'malchus. You know, when you're Karav l'malchus, every day there's dignitaries and there's visits and there's photos and there's pictures. It's a whole lifestyle. It's public office. It's an interesting lifestyle. It's not an easy lifestyle. And when you get used to it, it affects you. Why did he have to do this? And we know he did it, and most of his brothers agreed. So Rashi, the great commentator who searches for the literal interpretation of the Megilah, scans in his mind's eye, does the Megilah anywhere answer this question? You leave me with the final verse telling me that he was beloved by most of his brothers. You want me to know that some of his brothers disagreed, and we explained why. So now let's understand, why did the majority disagree with them, and why did Mordechai disagree with them? Didn't they have seemingly a good taina? The job is done successfully. Kudos unto you. Now go back to learning. So Rashi looks and looks and looks. Where does the Megilah answer this question of why Mordechai rejected the view of some of his peers? And he searches. And at first glance, the Megillah doesn't address this question. And then Rashi realized the Megillah does address the question in the opening verse. Vayihi b'mei Achashverosh, hu Achashverosh. And Rashi realized that those two words, hu Achashverosh, are really an explanation for the last pasuk of the Megillah. The two excessive, seemingly superfluous words, hu Achashverosh, answer the question in the last verse of the Megillah. Why Ratzi l'roiv echav, and some didn't disagreed with him, and nonetheless, he would not follow their advice, and he remained Karev l'malchus. What's the reason? On this Rashi says, because Achasverosh, hu berisha mitchilase v'atzayf. The opening of the Megillah says you have to know something about Achasverosh. At the surface, Achasverosh became the greatest Jew lover. Everything looked perfect and wonderful. Everything was dandy. Couldn't have been a better situation. You should know Achasverosh, hu Achasverosh. Achasverosh is the same Achasverosh in the beginning of the story and at the end of the story. In Yiddish there's an expression, derselbe Jente, anders geschleiert. Anybody? I don't know how to translate it. The same person in a different costume. It's the same person, they just learned to change the uniform. They learned to change the language. It's taka true, Achashverosh hung Haman and he nullified the decree, and he gave Mordechai and Esther Haman's home, and he allowed Mordechai and Esther to do what they wanted with their enemies. All's good and fine. But you should know that Bipnimius on a deeper level, Achashverosh hu Achashverosh. So the Zelba Achashverosh in the beginning and the end, and just like in the beginning, Haman came with an offer that he couldn't refuse. Even now in the midst of this paradise, somebody can emerge with an offer that Achashverosh won't be able to refuse, and everything Chalila could be transformed from one extreme to another extreme. In such a situation, you have to remain vigilant. You have to remain al hamishmar, as they say. You have to remain cautious and ready for every available opportunity. You know, Mordechai knew he could leave the palace. He wanted to leave the palace. Mission accomplished. But Mordechai knew as long as he's the Mishnah L'Melech Achashverosh, he can monitor, he can scrutinize, he has the influence, he has the relationship, he has the ties, the connections, and the power to be able to survey, scrutinize, monitor, see the situation, and eliminate, neutralize, or nip in the bud a future type of Haman in any type of manifestation that it's going to be. So the words hu Achashverosh, according to Rashi, are the explanation why Mordechai could not agree with the minority of his brothers. And yet, some of them still disagreed, but this was only a minority, because they perhaps felt that the present must override the future, and since in the present moment there was no foreseeable danger, Mordechai, you have no right to be in the palace. Next year something will happen. You'll worry about it then. Mordechai and most of the Sanhedrin were not of that opinion. They felt that the future always has to be part of present calculations, especially when it comes to a man like Achashverosh and the Persian Empire and the palace, and therefore Mordechai felt he should remain there. Which the truth is, when you think about this is also a reflection of many aspects of a person's life. Because very often, applying these ideas to our lives are not always simple, because it's not always on the same level. But the concept, the nucleus of the concept, is extremely applicable to life. Sometimes a person goes through a struggle, goes through a situation, and we emerge from this situation. What a mistake that people sometimes make is, when they emerge from it, they think that nothing can ever come back, and that they're immune completely to the problem. So the pasuk says you have to know that sometimes at the surface everything looks calm, but there may be an undercurrent, and if you don't stand vigil against this Achashverosh, he could be a dangerous person. I was once for a Shabbaton in Boca Raton in Florida. There's a big center of recovery there. A lot of recovery centers on Boca Raton. So there was a Shabbos that a Jewish organization in Boca that deals with Jews in recovery made a big Shabbaton for hundreds of people in recovery and their families. It was a beautiful Shabbaton. Dr. Tversky was there, Rabbi Tversky was there, some other therapists were there. I also had the privilege of being there. And I remember someone stood up at one of the groups, one of the smaller groups, and he said, "Hi, I am in the program. I am an addict. I'm an addict. I'm addicted to alcohol, and I've been sober for 32 years. And he introduced himself and he spoke about some of his struggles. I went over to him afterwards. I said, "You call yourself an addict? When you were sober 32 years, 32 years the man did not taste alcohol. Halavai of alle Yidden gezagevar. 32 years, even Pesach, he drinks grape juice. He's not allowed to drink wine. 32 years, he didn't have a Kiddush. He didn't have a L'chaim, nish Purim, nish Simchas Torah, not Pesach, nothing. Because he has an addiction problem. It's a disease. So I say, why are you calling yourself an addict when 32 years you didn't taste alcohol? I had alcohol last Shabbos. I don't call myself an addict. I have alcohol every Shabbos. I drink wine. You didn't drink in 32 years. Why are you calling yourself an addict?" And he told me, Rabbi Jacobson, the day I stop calling myself an addict is the day I will once again fall prey to the disease of alcoholism, and I will end up in the abyss. I must always tell myself I am an addict. The devil waits for me, not around the corner, waits for me 1 yard away. The moment I tell myself, time to chill out, to relax, nothing going on, you could just cruise through your life, you don't have to be alert, that's the day I become sick once again, dysfunctional, and I lose my sobriety. It was an extremely powerful idea, because I remember there's a Maisa that Reb Simcha Binim of Pshischa, the great Hasidic master Reb Simcha Binim of Pshischa, was once talking to his students. And this was, Reb Simcha Binim lived in the late 1700s and the early 1800s. Those were the decades of the French Revolution. One of the very mean and bloody instruments used in the French Revolution was the guillotine. You're familiar with the guillotine. Reb Simcha Binim used the guillotine as a metaphor. They would behead. They beheaded many thousands and thousands with the guillotine in the name of the egalitarianism and the fraternity of the French Revolution. It was a bloody revolution for the sake of emancipation. And so, Reb Simcha Binim told his students, he said, that an alert Jew, a conscientious Jew, an ehrlich Yid, as he put it, is somebody who sees the Yetzer Hara as standing with a guillotine right over his head. And he's about to chop off his head. He said, that's this consciousness with which a Jew should realize he's in. That's the consciousness that a Jew should have, that the Yetzer Hara is standing with the guillotine over his head. So one of his Hasidim said, Rebbe, what if I don't feel so? I don't feel it. He says, then your head was chopped off already. Now, the point here was, I don't think the idea to live in constant stress or guilt. The idea was the conscientiousness, the deep alertness and awareness, how vulnerable the human spirit is. The human spirit is very, very powerful, but it's also extremely vulnerable. It's also extremely frail. And the moment I tell myself, I could just relax, I can let go, everything is good, it sounds nice and geschmack, but I may be making a very profound mistake. Because that Yetzer Hara that wants to kill me, whatever form he or she takes on, may be 1 foot away, 2 feet away, 3 feet away. It's like if somebody has a diabetic problem. It's under control. They eat healthy. They eat only kale and spinach 24 hours a day. They exercise daily. There's no obesity. Maybe it's so under control, perhaps they don't even have to take insulin. Perhaps. Or they do have to and they take insulin. And everything seems good. He feels healthy, she feels healthy. There's symptoms of diabetes that can often be devastating and horrendous, seem to be gone in this person's life. The worst mistake that sometimes people make is, because it looks good, everything is good. And when they're sitting at a kiddush and they see a wonderful, beautiful piece of cheesecake, they right away dig into it because I feel great. Little do they realize that you always have to know that there's a condition. And the condition I have to be aware of and be in control of. And on the contrary, as long as I do that, I can be happy, I can be wholesome, I can be accepting. This is the reality, and this is what I have to take care of. It's not a tragedy. The moment I tell myself, no, I have to be perfect, I have to be in a situation where there's nothing to struggle with, and I can't stand the fact that I have something to deal with, that I have a struggle, that's when ultimately I sometimes become defeated. Because the deep inclination that some of us have, when will come the day that I won't have to deal with an Achasverosh? When will come the day that everything will be clear and I'm Mechaya and easy and serene? That's the day I want to go into denial. And then I don't have any more the resources or the means to actually deal with it. And this is true in every single person's life. A person who has a heart condition doesn't mean that their life is doomed. It just means they have to know they have a heart condition. And the day they forget it and they make believe they don't have a heart condition is the day when Chalila, their heart condition, actually can take over their life and literally, yes, and damage is sometimes irreversibly loyal. So therefore, in each person's life there is this concept of never confuse the silent relaxation, the serene waters on the surface with the undercurrents, with the rage on the bottom of the sea, not because it's a mitzvah to be depressed or to bring up toxicity or to make problems when there's no problems, but out of the honesty and their awareness of what I'm dealing with, what is going on in my reality, and therefore what I always have to be vigilant against, even if I'm having an unbelievable few weeks or few months or few years or few days or few hours or in some cases few minutes. The Gemara says, Meruba mida toiva mimida puranius. Positivity is always more powerful than negativity. Sometimes it looks like negativity is more powerful than positivity, but that's not the case. Positive energy is always ultimately more powerful than negative energy. If this is true in the negative sense, it's so much more so in the positive sense. What does this mean? Very often, a person could look at their life and they see that when they were young, they were very innocent, they were wholesome. And then at some point in life, they took a certain turn, consciously or unconsciously, willingly or unwillingly, and they made a lot of mistakes in their life. Again, it could have been willingly, it could have been completely inadvertently. And even if it was willingly, it was without understanding what they're doing. Maybe a lack of maturity, a lack of awareness, a lack of depth, a sense of desperation, or simply using the only tools and resources they had to know. And then they come to a later point in life when you wake up one morning and you're like, oy vavoy, what have I done or what have I not done? And this is true about so many lives where people make mistakes, and sometimes profound mistakes. We make choices, we engage in certain behaviors and certain patterns. And every person, many people in their own way, there's no need to be very specific here because with each person it can manifest itself in a wholly different way. Sometimes things that are internal, external, or both of them. Machshava, dibur, maisa, seichel, midos, whatever it may be. And when the person emerges, once again they feel very despondent. They feel hopeless. They feel in despair. 5 years wasted, 10 years wasted, 20 years wasted, 30 years wasted. Not only wasted, sometimes damaging, etc. Comes the Torah and says, Vayehi b'mei Achashverosh hu Achasverosh, hu b'rishoy mitchilosoi va'ad soifa. Achashverosh had a few years when he was the kindest guy in the world. He was delicious to the Jewish people. It was a Mechaya, he was the promise. He was the dream king for the Jewish people. Comes the Megilah and says, that's on the surface. On a deeper level, I want you to know who Berisha mitchilosei v'atzoifai. His core was one of wickedness. His core was one of immorality. And therefore, now politically, it made sense for him to be on the side of the Jewish people. Don't think it's a transformation in essence. Look how he treats Esther. Look how he treats Mordechai. Look what he did with Haman. Look how he treats the Jews. I know. It works for him. Wonderful, great. Take the ball and run with it. But don't become deceptive. Don't go into hallucinations. And this is true about Jewish history. Jews were living in Germany for hundreds and hundreds of years. They were more German than many Germans. The assimilation rate and success in Germany was incredible. The same in Spain and other places in the world. And then, from nowhere almost, things were metamorphosized to the opposite extreme. That's in the negative, but the same is true in the positive. Every person, when they're born, what do we say in the morning? Elikai neshama shenasata bi tahirihi. The soul that you have imbued within me is pure. Tahir in the language of Zohar doesn't mean pure, it means light. Tahiru means light in Aramaic, it means light. It's pure, but it's full of light. It's part of the divine light. It's part of divine infinity. So therefore, when you look at yourself, you have to know, just like you say, Achashverosh hu Achashverosh, you have to know that a Jew is a Jew is a Jew who betzitkai mitchilasei v'atzoifai. Even if in the middle of a person's life, a person goes through different vicissitudes, and the turbulence and roller coaster of life is very, very extreme, turbulent and fluctuating, and therefore I may end up in places that later I will regret. Never ever should a person think that this undermines, obliterates, and destroys the essential wholesomeness, godliness, holiness, sacredness, purity, and connectedness of the soul. In the middle there were a few years where the person had a break or there was an interruption. That interruption is an external interruption. It's not an interruption that changes and alters and contaminates and ultimately breaks the powerful Kedusha, the holiness and the oneness and the purity and the happiness and the sacredness and the wholesomeness, the shleimus of the human soul and of the Jewish soul. So just like you say by Achashverosh, hu berisha mitchilosei v'atzoifai, notwithstanding what happens in the middle, the same is true also in the positive sense. Sometimes it's a few generations. Somebody sent me an email yesterday. Actually, a woman sent me an email. She got married. She grew up in a very nice, religious Jewish community. She got married, and she fell prey to certain behaviors that were, she described, not so, let's put it this way, not so just. So she asked me at the end of the letter, these were her words, have I been knocked out of infinity? So I wrote back to her, your question already contains your answer. You don't have to write to me. The way you phrased your question so eloquently contains your answer. You ask, have I been knocked out? She tells me that she calls a rabbi to find out if she puts a grape or a raspberry in her salad, does she have to make her eitz on the grape or the raspberry in her salad? When it comes to issues of profound morality in terms of relationships and intimacy, the situation is very wanting. So she feels that she's out of the Jewish nation. She's not connected. Have I been knocked out from infinity? So I said, your question is your answer. Because the definition of infinity is, what's infinity? Infinity means that it exists in every place and in every situation. There's no space devoid of it. So if you're dealing with infinity, you can't be knocked out of infinity. If it's really infinite, you can't be knocked out of it. What you could do is, you could not allow yourself to experience the infinity. You can eclipse your awareness of the infinity, but you can't knock yourself out of the infinity. Whenever it says in Chumash, that a person sometimes does things, and it cuts off a soul from God, So the Baal HaTanya L'Kutei Torah, Rosh Hashanah, says that all of Koros and the whole Torah only addresses the level of Yaakov of the soul, not the level of Yisrael of the soul. In every soul there's two levels. There's what's called Yaakov and Yisrael. He has two names. Yaakov comes from the word Akev, which means the heel. Yisrael is Li Rosh, which means my head. The way the soul is manifested in the heel, meaning the way the soul is manifested in the conscious body of a human being, a person could be cut off because consciously they're not connected to infinity. But in the core of the soul, it's echad, yachid, umeyuchad. It's completely one with Hashem. There's nothing that a person could do or not do that alters and damages and destroys that essential relationship. And therefore, for Achashverosh to go back to his rishus, doesn't have to reinvent himself. He just has to go back to his natural self. For a person to go back to their happiness and wholesomeness and confidence and joy and optimism and purity, they don't have to reinvent themselves. They have to simply sideswipe, they simply have to ignore the distractions that disconnected themselves from themselves. You have to go back to who you really, really are, that you were always that, and you will always be that. On an external level, perhaps on a conscious level, there was some years or some experiences that took you away from it. Which this concept, this idea, sheds light on another component in the first chapter of the Megilah, in the opening story of the Megilah, which is also extremely strange. We focus in the first verse. When you look at the first chapter of the Megilah, you have a story about Achashverosh's party in detail, which at first glance, the whole thing seems superfluous. It says he was a king, and after 3 years he decided to throw a party. Beautiful. And who was the party for? All of his noblemen and all of his ministers and all of his servants and all of his troops and all of the governors that were under him, all of the provinces. And how long was the party for? 180 days. That's half a year. A year is 365 days. 180 days is literally almost a half a year. So here you get a glimpse of a man. A half a year to Gehulat. 180 years of parting. I'm sorry, 180 days of parting. Now, some people are party animals. You may know some of them. Weekends, about 180 days straight. And the purpose was one, to show off his wealth and his glory and his preciousness. You would think after 180 days of drinking, it's time to relax. You would think he would have had a hangover and he needed a vacation. Comes the Megilah, nechte ketag. Don't even think so. He finished. He just said, now we just have to have a party. An alcoholic once told me, I said, how do you deal with hangovers? He says, you drink, you don't stop drinking, you never get a hangover. A hangover is because you become sober. He says, if you never stop, you never get a hangover. You would think Achashverosh after 180 years would stop. Days. Freudian slips. Comes the Megilah and says, no, he made another feast for 7 days, and this is for everybody, the whole nation in Shushan. L'megadol v'at katan, everybody, b'chatzar ginas bisan hamelech. In the courtyard, in the orchard, and in the house of the king. As the Gemara says in Megilah, haraya lechatzer, chatzer, haraya legina, gina, haraya. Those who belonged in the court, he had sections in the courtyard. It was one type of party. There they did the arts and crafts. In the orchard, they had another type of party. There they had the bar. And in the house, they had, the party there. I wasn't invited to that part of the party. I only had a pass to the first two. If it's not enough, then the Megilah now has to describe to us the materials that were at the party. Chur, karpas, chelas, achus, begachavle vutz, v'argaman al glile chesef, v'amudei sheish. And we have to know the beds, mitoizav, v'chetzef, aritzbas, ba'at, b'sheish, v'dar, v'secharis. We have to know the goblets, v'hashkes, b'chleizav, v'chelim, v'kelim, shoinim, v'yein, malchus, rav, ki yad hamelech. In English translation, there were spreads of white, fine cotton, blue, turquoise, embroidered with cords of linen and purple on silver rods, marble columns, couches of gold and silver on a pavement of green, white, shell, onyx, marble. And they gave them to drink in golden vessels, and the vessels differed from one another. Royal wine was plentiful according to the bounty of the king. The drinking was according to the law, with no one coercing. This is what the king ordained in everybody. And then Vashti did the Zal B'maisa. And here, the person who's reading the Megillah wonders. It certainly tells us that this man liked to drink. No question. It tells us that the guy liked to party. It's also important because this is why he was drunk and smashed and inebriated, and he summoned Vashti to appear in her full glory, and Vashti, who had her own party, because she also had to party, refused to come, and we all know the story, how ultimately her husband, the king, had her executed. And as a result of that, he went into a depression, and they told him it's time to bring in a new queen, and ultimately Esther is brought into the palace, and he chooses her as her queen. So later, when Haman issues forth his decree, the chess pieces have been set for the nullification of the edict, of the royal decree to annihilate the Jewish people. But for that, you say one line or two lines. I mean, why don't you tell me where Vashti was born, where Achashverosh was born, how Achashverosh became king? If you want to tell me the whole history, you can go back and back and back. What's relevant is that Esther became the queen. You want to tell me how Esther became the queen? You could say there was a party and Vashti betrayed her husband and he killed her. You want to say some details of how she betrayed him? You could say details. Is it really important for me to know what type of marble and linen he had decorated, he was decorated his dining room with? It's interesting to see what a good party was like. But the fact that it makes it into the Tanakh, into the Megillah, why does the Megillah feel the need to describe in so much detail the exact components of what the feast looked like? After 180 days, this is the last feast of the last 7 days. L'may nafka minah. He made a big party, he was drunk, his wife was drunk, weiter, chasal said the Pesach. No, chasal said the Purim. Chur, karpas, tchelas, boots, argaman, amudei sheish, the types of couches and beds, the types of goblets. Why is this relevant in Torah and the Megillah? And to fulfill the mitzvah of Purim, you have to read this chapter too. I can't ignore this chapter and say, let's get to the crux of the story. You want the story of Purim, you have to go through this whole party. And you have to know every type of linen that exists, every type of linen and the embroidered fabric that was used at this feast. And one of the explanations to this is that with this, the Tanakh, the Megillah, is conveying a very powerful lesson in life. And the lesson in life is learned from Achasverosh, just like the previous lesson is learned from Achasverosh. And that is, it can't just be to tell you that Achasverosh was a drunk. That could have been very brief and concise. The Torah, the Tanakh here tries to teach a lesson about how a person has to live their life. Achashverosh is nicht gewesen kein Übergespitzter, as they say in Yiddish. He was not a very wise man. In fact, the Gemara says the man was melech hafchafan. He was a spineless person. Which is why one day he was on this side and the other day he was on this side, which is why Mordechai was so concerned with him. The man didn't have principles. There was a Jewish comedian who once said, he said, listen to me, I have principles in life, and if you don't like them, I have other ones. It's before him. There's always other principles, it's fine. As Churchill once told somebody in Parliament, said, everybody is for sale. The question is how much? Some people $100, some people $100,000, some people it takes a little more. Achashverosh was a melech, he was a man who was spineless. Which is, by the way, the psychology that Haman employed, and the same psychology, even more brilliantly, that Esther employed. We once gave a shir on the yeshiva.net on Purim, I think a few years ago. What was the psychology that Esther used in transforming her husband? She understood who he was, and therefore she created the whole story in order to be able to accomplish what had to be accomplished to save her people. Achashverosh, therefore, is not seen in our sources in a very, very sublime fashion. And you could see from the description of the party and his story, this whole story about him, who he is. And nonetheless, we learn from him one thing. And what do we learn from him? Achashverosh knows that when you throw a party, you have to do it right. Achashverosh knows you don't do things according to other people's capabilities. You do things according to your own capabilities. For him, the essence of life is feasting 187 days. Those are his priorities, or his agendas, or his joys, or his distractions, whatever you want to call it. An alcoholic, there was a shikha I grew up in his neighborhood. He once told me, all of us drink because we try to drown our sorrow. We fail to realize that sorrow floats. Not bad for an alcoholic. He's already a Fanayla Ma'amis. He was the real thing. So, whatever it is for him, his priorities, his distractions. But what you learn from Achashverosh is he never does things in a small way. So yoitze sein. There's no such a thing. Let's get it over with. I believe in throwing a party. We're going to do it for a half a year. Straight. No weekend breaks. No Memorial Day, President Day. There's no weekend breaks. We're going to feast for 180 days. If that's not enough, we're going to feast for another 7 days. And I'm not going to serve up a few dishes. Some knishes and jalapeno herring and some little hot dogs with egg rolls. And I'm going to decorate. I'm going to bring in somebody and put in a few lights and make a nice decoration. The Megilah describes in detail Haroya lechatzer, those who belong in the chatzer and in the gin and the bison and the chur and the karpas and the chelis and the chavlei vutz and the glilei chesef and the mitoy zav chesef. And the types of goblets, and every goblet had to be of gold, and they had to be different sizes, so that you should be able to drink exactly according to your capacity. What's the Megilah trying to say? If a tippish like Achashverosh, as the Gemara calls a melech tippish, it's not my own expression. If a fool like Achashverosh understood this is how you have to live, the Tanakh is also giving a lesson meruba midah toiva in the positive sense, in a productive sense, in a godly sense, in a meaningful sense, how a Jew is supposed to live. One of the greatest mistakes people make in life is they short-circuit themselves. They underestimate themselves. They live lives that copy other people and they base it on other people's capabilities. Relative to this person, I'm doing well. You come and you learn from Achashverosh is, don't underestimate the tremendous capabilities of your own life. Don't compare yourself to other people's potentials. You tune in to the full majesty and the full grandeur of all of your talents, resources, capabilities, spiritual, physical, emotional, psychological, mental, and social abilities, and live life to the fullest. Carpe diem, seize the day. Don't allow mediocrity, fear, insecurity to suppress your talents, to stifle your creativity, to crush your energy, to dampen the depth of your soul. Even a tippish and an idiot and a spineless Achashverosh understood you're living. Do it wie se darf zu sein. Live life to the fullest. Most people live lives of quiet desperation. Achashverosh decides if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it right, and right means according to my potential, not according to somebody else's potential. So many people live their lives according to other people's potentials. Why are you comparing yourself to other people's potentials? You know you have a voice inside of you. You have a koyach inside of you. Don't let even 1% of it be stifled. Don't squander ever any component of your psyche. It was a gift given to you. Ohr Chaim says, we say in the Shir Shel Yom of Sunday from Tehillim, we say, David Mizmer Hashem Ha'artzim Lo Yatevu Yesha Miyala B'Har Hashem U'Miyakim B'Mkayim Kadshay. Who will scale the mountain of Hashem, and who will stand there? Neki Chapayim, a person with clean hands. Speaking about politicians. Bar Levav, a person with a pure heart. Asher Lo Nasa Lashav Nafshi. He didn't carry my soul in vain and did not swear deceitfully. What does, I understand clean hands, pure heart, he doesn't swear deceitfully, he doesn't lie. What's Hashaloi Nosel Hashav Nafshi? He did not carry my soul in vain. Every single person was given a soul. If my soul has a skill or a talent that I do not maximize and utilize, I'm carrying my soul in vain. Ashaloi Nosel Hashav Nafshi. Every person has an infinite piece of God that was given to you, was given to me, was given to her, was given to him. And no two are the same. This is my music that only I could play. Nobody in history before me could play this music, and nobody in history after me could play this music. And if I fail to play my notes, I am carrying my nefesh, I'm carrying my soul in vain. And my soul looks at me and says, why don't you do with me what you're supposed to do with me? Why are you allowing fears or insecurities or past events or trauma not to realize and discover how you can live fully your life according to your design and your potentiality? Learn from Achasverosh, for heaven's sake. Look what a party he threw in his life. Megilah, perhaps your tastes are much more developed than Achasverosh. Perhaps our tastes in life should be more fine-tuned, more honed, more subtle than Achasverosh. But whatever it is, miruba midatayva, for sure, kol shekei v'kal v'chaimer. In your party, in your feast that you could throw in life, don't allow smallness, don't allow katnus, don't allow pettiness and smallness to define your course. Sometimes people make decisions in life, and the entire decision is based on such petty calculations. And 15 years later, this person is still not speaking to his sister-in-law. This person is not speaking to their mother, to their brother, to their brother-in-law, to their nephew. You will ask why? Because something happened at a chasana. 22 years ago, my husband was supposed to get a bracha under the chuppah. He didn't get the bracha under the chuppah. 22 years later, these two families are on speaking terms. Grandchildren are not allowed to talk to each other. And you look at a person and you say, Zolzain, somebody did something wrong. How can you allow the course of your life to be defined by pettiness, by smallness? How can one who is so big live their life as though they were so small? Rabbi Aaron Karliner said the greatest tragedy in life is when a prince decides that he or she belongs in the slums. The greatest tragedy in life is when I believe that I belong in the slums and I live that way. And then I analyze exactly what type of slum I should be in. And I start decorating my slums. I turn it into a whole philosophy. The Medrash, the Yalkut Shimoni, tells a story, it's quite a story, about a man named Nevois HaYisraeli. You remember from your days in Beis Yaakov? You remember the story of Nevois HaYisraeli. There was a King Achav, his wife's name was Izebel. She was a bigger tzatzka than he was. There was a Jew named Nevois, and he had a beautiful vineyard. It was a glorious vineyard. One day Achav comes home and he's depressed. His wife says, why are you in a bad mood? So he says that he really would love to acquire the vineyard of Nevois. So she says, offer, Bob, make him an offer that he can't refuse. He makes him an offer, and Nevois says, Chalila, never. This is a property that I inherited from my ancestors all the way back to the generation that came into the land. And the Torah was not very approving, was not very fond of those who gave away their estates of the Holy Land, because these original estates were organic. They were organically connected to the souls of the different Shvatim. That's why Yovel, every field had to go back to its original owner. You couldn't make a sale in Eretz Yisrael in the first Beis HaMikdash more than 50 years. It was very interesting. There was no such a thing as real sales. It was a lease for 50 years. Yovel had to go back because the pieces of land in Eretz Yisrael are organically connected to the families that were settled there, divided by Yehoshua ben Nun when they came into the land. So Nevois tells Achav, no way I'm going to sell my vineyard. You can offer me whatever you want. This is my vineyard. So Izebel, who was a machshefa, as your grandmother would say, a real one, tells Achav what's the problem. And she orchestrates a heinous crime. She has two witnesses testifying falsely that Nevois cursed the king, which has a death penalty, and he's killed. And if you're executed because of rebellion against the king acquired your property, and Achav gets the vineyard. And that's when Eliyahu, the prophet of the time, Elijah comes to Achav, and he tells him those three famous words: Haratzachta, V'gam Yarashta. You're going to murder and then inherit. And as a result, Izebel and Achav are punished very, very heavily, with a bitter end to both of them, both the husband and the wife, the king and the queen, Achav and Izebel. That's what the Tanakh says. But the Medrash, which always needs to give us the harmony to the melody, because in Judaism there's the melody and then there's the harmony. There's the song and there's the harmony. So the text is always the song and the Medrash is the harmony. So the Medrash asks, granted, Achav and Izebel were wicked, but why didn't the voice lose his life? And the Yalkut Shimoni gives a fascinating answer. And the answer is that Nevois had an exquisite voice. He had one of the most extraordinary voices of the generation. Now remember, this was a time when the Jewish people were split between Malchus Yehuda and Malchus Yisrael, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. There were two tribes that remained loyal to the kings of the family of King David from the tribe of Yehuda. Most of the tribes, the 10 tribes, were under Malchus Yisrael, the king that split away from the family of David, which began with Yeravam ben Nevat. And it's this split that ultimately weakened the nation and caused the destruction. The 10 tribes were exiled and they assimilated. We still don't know where they are. And the 2 tribes remained under Malchus Yehuda. One of the things Yeravam did was he didn't allow people to go to the Beis HaMikdash. He created 2 golden calves by him in Dan and Beersheba. He wanted they should stay there. He didn't want them to visit Yerushalayim because that's where the competitor was. Nevois had an extraordinary voice. Every Chol HaMoed, there was a mitzvah for Jews to go up to the Beis HaMikdash 3 times a year: Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot. Every one of the 3 Yamim Tovim, Nevois would hold a concerto on the Har HaBayis, on the Temple Mount by the Beis HaMikdash. And this was the attraction for thousands of Jews to hear a concert from Nevois on Pesach, Shavuos, just like they have now Simchas Pesach Sheva concerts. So he would do a Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkot concerto with a symphony by the Beis HaMikdash, by the Har HaBayis, and his voice was heavenly. He was the talent of the generation. So for decades he would travel, and this brought even Jews who otherwise wouldn't go because of the heavy politics and strife, but they came to the Beis HaMikdash because of him. After so many years, Nevois tells himself one day, you know what? It's time to go on vacation. It's time to retire. Every Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkot, I have to go to the Har HaBayis, the Beis HaMikdash. I want to remain on my my comfortable couch in the dining room. Tachas Gafni v'tachas Teinasi, under my vineyard and under my fig tree. I had enough years of service to the Jewish people. Enough years. Now it's time for me just to sit back, relax, enjoy the show. Comes Yom Tov afternoon, I'll finish the meal, plop down on the couch, and in the few minutes before I fall asleep, I'll sit with my magazine or whatever he sits with and enjoy myself. And I could walk a few steps. I don't have to sit with thousands of Jews on a tight mountain in a tight Beis HaMikdash, mekvetch sich, you're like a sardine. It's not balabatish. It's not balabatish. And that was it. He quit. He said, I did enough, and he quit. So the Rebbeinu Shalom says, I gave you, your soul was given to you with this special voice in order to inspire a generation. You finish doing this, it's time for your soul to go back to its place. So I didn't carry my soul in vain. This is one of the great ideas that the Tanakh is trying to bring out with the first chapter of Megillah Esther. How many people look back at their lives, and if you would ask them, if you could redo it, what things, I've read a very interesting book, a nurse who was in a hospice, interviewed dozens and dozens of people before they left this world about regrets of life. People in their 80s and their 90s, people who were younger but were very ill. And it's fascinating to read what people write at the end of their life when things are much more clear and there's less distractions and nobody's busy and things set in with a certain maturity. And it's incredible to read what people say, if only I could have redone it and do it differently. The Baal Shem Tov, in fact, once said, what's the difference between Gan Eden and Gehenna? What is paradise and what is purgatory? Some people think you go to Gehenna, there's a big barbecue waiting for you, and you're going to be thrown into a pot of hot water. But of course, a soul is not physical. So physical hot water or physical fire doesn't relate to a soul. All these descriptions of Gehenna are metaphoric, they're parables. I know some of you were taught otherwise, so I want to calm you down. A soul can't be affected by a physical fire. You're dealing with a spiritual soul. You're talking about metaphors. You have to understand the metaphors. So one of the ideas, the Baal Shem Tov once said, he said it in his own words, I'll put it in my own words as follows. When we face truth, there's a printout. Google prints out for God. This was even before the days of Google, but now it's already easier because Google does it. Prints out your entire life story. You know, Google walks around with you wherever you go. It's impossible today to have a private moment. And therefore, it's not b'sefer, it's on the computer, but it's somewhere nichtav. And you're given a printout of everything, your whole life. And the Baal Shem Tov says a person is shown, a printout or shown, let's say, a video. A video, there's a monitor, and they show you a video of their entire life. But there's two videos. One video is what my life looked like. The other video was what my life could have. My therapist is going to be very busy today. I think I have to ask him to give me an extra hour. One is what my life looks like. One is what my life could have looked like. And the Baal Shem Tov said something incredible. For some people, looking at those two videos is a sense of paradise, and for others, it's an experience of hell. Seeing the contrast, seeing the comparison. In fact, in Tanakh, the term used for Gehenna is Sha'oil. Sha'oil Tachtis. The word Sha'oil means the abyss, the grave, down, deep down. But the word Sha'oil comes from another word. Which word? Sha'ul, borrowed. The definition of purgatory is that I live a borrowed life. Why do I live a borrowed life? Tachtis, Sha'ul Tachtis, because I believe I'm on the bottom. And because I believe I'm on the bottom, I have no choice but to borrow somebody else's life. How can I live my life when my life is so mediocre? When I'm such an idiot, when I feel that I'm so foolish, I'm so stupid. I'm just a stupid girl, a stupid boy. I'm just a moron. I don't deserve anything. Who am I to be happy, to be wholesome, to be connected, to be powerful, to be gorgeous, to be successful, to have an impact? Who am I? Tachtis. I'm on the bottom. So I borrow other people's lives. Oh, your life is good. Let me borrow. Let me borrow your kitchen. Let me borrow your dining room. Let me borrow your looks. Let me borrow your bar mitzvah. Let me borrow your simcha. Let me borrow your napkins. Let me borrow your family. Let me borrow your personality. Let me borrow your jokes. Let me borrow your humor. Let me borrow your behavior. On one level or another level, consciously or unconsciously. That's what Gehenna is. In a deeper life, in a more real life, a person realizes that your life, your soul is infinite. It's a chelek eloikam mimal mamish. It's a piece of divinity. God doesn't have to copy anybody. You don't have to copy anybody. God is not embarrassed with himself. Don't be embarrassed with yourself. Yourself is a piece of God. You are a princess of Hashem. You are part of the light of Hashem. And therefore, in each person's life, what I always have to ask myself is, not how I'm compared to somebody else. What I have to ask myself is, am I being true to my true potential and my true koiches in throwing my party of life? Whatever my party looks like. For a Jew, a party is different than Achashverosh's party. But the Gemara says in Erevin, Hai Alma Kebei Hiluladamya. This world is like a wedding. Grab and eat, grab and drink. What's the definition of a wedding? Why a wedding? So the Baal Shem Tov once said, a wedding is an interesting thing. A wedding is one of those things in life you prepare for 6 months. If you would have 3 years, you would prepare 3 years. If you have 2 months, you prepare 2 months. For how long? Couple of hours. But in the wedding itself, what's the most important moment in the wedding? In the chuppah itself, what's the most important wedding? The kibbudim you give this guy, that guy, that guy. One moment, nobody even sees it. It's usually the video guy also misses it because there's somebody screaming in the back. He puts the ring on her finger and says, which should take around 3 or 4 seconds. If he knows the nusach, even less. So the whole wedding, 5 hours, 6 hours, with a reception, with a kabbalas panim, with gowns, with pictures, with flowers, with bars, with, I don't have to describe to you, those of you who made weddings. Months before, and then the paying out, for what? 1 moment. And sometimes people miss the significance of that moment. At that moment, people are elsewhere. This one is stressed and this one is overwhelmed. Sometimes the closest people to the chassan and kala at the wedding are not present. Too much. They're not present. Sometimes guests come, this one talks about the food, this one talks about the Viennese table, this one talks about the gown, this talks about the music, but the nekuda they missed. So the Baal Shem Tov says, that's Pshat, the Gemara says, Hai alma kebei hilula damya. This world is like a wedding. There's a lot going on in this world and you could miss the point. You could miss the nekuda. There's a lot to get distracted with. And it's good things to get distracted with. Pictures are important. And the right headpieces are important. And the right table, what is it called? What do they put on the table? Centerpieces are critical. And how many pieces of sushi by the Kabbalah's Panim is pikuach nefesh mamish for all the Jews who come hungry, etc., etc. But the nekuda I could miss, the ability of oneness, the unity between the chassan and the kala, the experience of dveikus, the oneness with Hashem, the nekuda of the wedding, a person misses. That's the hilula of the Jewish people. And when it comes to that nekuda, person has to ask himself, am I throwing the party that I know how to throw? I'll tell you something I once heard from a Chabad shliach, Chabad ambassador who went to a big community and accomplished an enormous amount. He went to a secular Jewish community and he built a shul, a mikveh, a preschool, a Talmud Torah, a school, a high school, a mikveh, a camp, literally the infrastructure of Jewish life, of Torah life. And the school was extremely successful, with hundreds of children. It was something extra, literally a miracle of miracles, a transformation from one extreme to another extreme, that could have not been possible without the work of one individual. And the person shared as follows. I have to say, this is not for the lighthearted, but it tells you about the power of when you believe in humans, when the power of believing in people. He was once by the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and the Rebbe told him as follows: if in your town there are 99,000 Jewish children, and you're going to build another school and another school and another school, and you're going to enroll in your schools 98,000 Jewish children plus 999 children. So you'll have 98,999 children in your schools. Livyasan, the Leviathan, you're going to get the biggest piece as a reward. Shur Habar, that big famous bull that we're going to eat when Mashiach comes, not from Agri, the real Shur Habar, you're going to get a big piece. Olam Haba, you're going to get. The Gemara Mishnah says every tzaddik is going to get Shin Yud Olamus. You're going to get 310 worlds as a reward for what you did in terms of spreading Yiddishkeit and educating Jewish children. Gan Eden in this world, Gan Eden in that world, Olam Haba, Shai Olamus, Levyasan and Shur Habar. Aber the Shlichus hast du nicht abgetan. But your mission you didn't fulfill, because one child was left behind. The shlichus hast du nicht abgetan. Now on one level you could look at it as like, come on, cut the guy slack. But that's only if you believe that people are finite. If you believe in the true ability of a person, if you understand that the true power of a person is infinity, then not to tell that to you is actually jipping you off. It's depriving you of what belongs to you. Not to tell a person about their koiches is not being kind to them. It's being cruel to them. And it's true in our life. Sometimes we're successful with this and with this and with that. But that one child, I did so many things. Livyasan you're going to get. Shai Rabbi you're going to get. Olam Haba is secured. You have the best place. Front row. It's not always good because you have to listen. But did I live up to fulfill my shlichus? Not always. So a person could say, all nice and good, but you know how many issues I have? I got too many issues. I'm still in Sha'ol Tachtis. This we go back to Achasverosh, who Achasverosh. That's why it's the opening pasuk. If you look at yourself essentially as damaged goods, then you're right. You just try to survive. If you realize that to call yourself damaged goods is the greatest crime and declaration against humanity. What damaged when damaged? Wholesome, wholesome, wholesome. Perfect, beautiful, pure, powerful, confident, happy, and optimism. Elamai, for a certain point, you may have been distracted of who you really are. You may not know who you really are. Different circumstances derail you from who you really are. But when you understand that, Achasverosh, who Achasverosh, in the positive sense, then you make sure that your party is one that will be remembered. Have a wonderful week, and a freilich and Purim to all of you.
This class is brought to you by theyeshiva.net. Please help us continue the classes. Make even a small contribution at www.theyeshiva.net/donate.